Hi, everybody. Good day from around the world. I'm Kyle Ellicott, your host for another edition of VC TV. I'm joined by some outstanding guests and friends of mine from around the world who are kind enough to dedicate a little bit of time today. And we're super excited to have each and every one of them join us. And today's topic is something that's very deep and dear to my heart, and that is what's happening in the Internet of Things and edge computing. So the Internet of Things I've been involved with for over 10 plus years at this point, and had the chance to meet not just our guests, but see a lot happen, change, and rapidly shift around in this. And recently we've had the emergence of the new term edge computing. And realistically, edge is our future. And our guests are going to talk a little bit about why that's happening and everything that's happening in between as the Internet of Things and edge touch all the industries that we all know, love, and operate in our daily lives. So before we introduce each and every one of our guests, as I'd like to do on every show, a big shout out to the wonderful and amazing Elena and to the entire LA Token team for bringing this all together and for making this possible. So without further ado, I am going to kick off. We're going to go Brady Bunch style. And first up, Mohammed, Irfan, apologies, if you could, just a short introduction about yourself, about your company, and how you got into the space, as I know you're a part of Bloccelerate, and then we'll go from there.
Great, thanks, Kyle, and good afternoon, everyone. To those of you who are here in North America, and good evening to you all there in Asia and Europe. That being said, my name is Irfan. My background, I'm a systems engineer, and I started off my career in research, and IoT and edge has been very close to me throughout my career, both in the investment side and also in the research and development side. So obviously, this is a term that, we are very familiar with right now. Of course, it had different term names before. Some of us who were working in the field used to call this telemetry, and we had a lot of usage of this back in the days. So that being said, I'm happy to pass the floor to everybody else, but this is an exciting topic. It's also very near and dear to me, and I wanted to thank LA Token to organize this fascinating session. Thank you.
Wonderful. We should just call this the near and dear panel, because I feel like this is personal to all of us. So it should be pretty exciting. Connie, welcome to the show. It is an absolute pleasure to finally have the chance to do something like this with you. For the audience that doesn't know you as well as I do, if you could, just a little background and how you got into the space as well.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle, for inviting me to this. This is very exciting. Why it's last minute call to duty.
It was.
I'm very excited here. This is a very interesting topic that really brings to the start of our fund and Nautilus Venture Partners. I remember back in 2013-14, as we were investing in sort of this general industrial manufacturing space for some of the, such as visual inspection, it just wasn't something that we can do efficiently. And the term was newly minted around that time as well, IoT. And so we, as a result, thinking there's sort of this much of a data that's going to come from the edge. Along with that, some of this analytics is going to be so important to some of the regular business that we do in industrial and manufacturing space. As a result, we proposed a new fund. And so here we are 5 years into it, into our second fund now. And so obviously, edge, as you said, is something that's sort of a natural progression of IoT. When we started with IoT, we are thinking about some sort of equipment that produces something that we need, some data we need. But really at that time, I don't think we had really thought through how do we process the data. And so that's a big part of where Edge is coming from. But it's also, along with 5G, I think that's going to really bring some excitement and new use cases we couldn't thought of at that time. So this is very interesting. So to me, it's not about whether or not, it's about when, and a lot of use cases are here already, but there's a lot more to come. It's very exciting. Thanks, Kyle.
It's very, very exciting. And I think, use cases is just one of the things we forgot about in IoT. And now we're starting to see these things play out. And last but not least, my co-founder, good friend, another gentleman I am excited to do a panel with. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Mr. Gavin Whitechurch. A little introduction and a little background on yourself, as you have a very storied history as well, like Irfan and Connie, in the Internet of Things, and now even more so in Edge. Make sure to click the unmute button there as well. And I turn it over to you. Quick introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. Thanks for the introduction. Great introduction, and hi to everybody. Hi to Connie and Mo. So yeah, my background is so I'm a co-founder of Topio with Kyle. We're a next generation market intelligence company using AI for market intelligence. My background is in market intelligence and market access for the last 30 years around tech. I spent a good while with the world's largest business information provider, which is called Informa. You won't know that name, but you'll know many of their brands, and open up many new tech markets for them. But particularly relevant to this discussion, like Mo, know the telematics space in the past, and I come from a sort of originally, I guess, a telecoms background, but focused on the last 8-10 years around Internet of Things. I created a show called Internet of Things World, IoT World, which is the world's largest Internet of Things show. And also in the past 2 years, really have been focusing on the space of edge computing, which we think is the next generation of compute, and is a larger market than the cloud market, and enables and is driven by sort of yin yang, a whole range of new use cases for technology.
Awesome, guys. Everyone, welcome to the show. And again, very excited, enthusiastic, as you've seen, to have each of you here together in a collective. So with that being said, I do want to dive in, and on each episode of VCTV, what we talk about a lot is what has changed over the past 6 months, right? A lot of our technologies, a lot of industries have shifted, some for the better, some not so much, some accelerated, some decelerated. And with Edge and IoT, I just want to propose this question, and we'll kind of go round robin here, is what has been accelerated when it comes to Edge and the Internet of Things? That's a big question to unpack, as again, these touch so many areas. But if we look back at the last 6 months and ahead the next 6, what has changed and what has been accelerated? Irfan, let's start with you, and then we'll go around.
Thanks, Kyle. And so I think, for starters, I'm sure, none of us have expected what's to come. But also at the same time, I think, what we have seen is that, we already had some groundwork that were laid for the jump that we needed to make to come to this era. So what the situation has done is that it's accelerated the entire process. Companies that were prepared with the systems and the solution to manage a situation like this were way more well equipped compared to companies that didn't have anything to do with, in terms of monitoring, etc. And this can be seen especially in the industrial side, right? So on the manufacturing side, where most manufacturers had to stop people going to the factories, in terms of production and all. Those who were prepared, and the companies who were able to give solutions in terms of tracking, monitoring, so whether it's in the production line, etc., that has peaked. And I'm sure my other panelists can also agree that now during this situation, where in remote management and remote product managers are constantly in charge of manufacturing, they require more and more data. And this of course, it's made possible by the advancement that's been made in this particular field. Now, when it comes to, of course, I have, there are different sets of challenges as well as, different set of thoughts when it comes to, how IoT infrastructure can be dealt with, right? So edge computing is one model, right? And there are other models that we can think of that can also be relevant to this, and we can definitely take the discussions there. But then apart from that, the other areas, and I think, where I think, post this situation has shown us that, has more potential than any other time is transportation, right? So we have seen during this pandemic that, most of the rideshare services have taken a major hit because of, proximity, drivers, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think right now, and before, it was more of a talk that when we're gonna have, more fully autonomous cars. But now, I think, post this situation, and this is based on my own research, is that autonomous cars are here to stay, and it is necessary for situations like this and for the future. So I'll pause right there. Of course, there are different areas that we can take a deep dive in, but that's more of my high level thought on areas where we have seen significant improvement and necessity considering the situation. Thank you.
Yeah, I see everyone's head shaking, and you pull out the word manufacturing, and I want to switch over to Connie real quick and then come down to Gavin. And as we go throughout the rest of the show, guys, feel free to just unmute yourself and wait for the next person to finish, and feel free to jump in. But Connie, would love to come to you into the same question is, what has been accelerated? As Irfan mentioned, manufacturing was a big word, and it's also a little bit of your background. So we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Over the past few months, I think most people realized that while digitization has been with us for the past decade or so, but a lot of things people wanted to do, planning to do in the next 3 years got done in 3 months. So that's something that's very transformational. And it really not only about how we live, but also how we do our work. Just think about you and us, right? We are here doing Zoom calls instead of in a sort of physical situation together. That is the same thing happening in manufacturing, in transportation, in industrial space. And recently we were looking at a company that really take the machine learning in sort of to really applications and use cases you would otherwise not think of. Think about number. When number comes in, you have a lot of workers have to physically inspect each and every truck. That's very laborious. It's time consuming. And in this day and age, you would think if I can have machine do all of those, then I don't have to have workers exposed in environment that they can really sort of in today's environment. Of course, today's environment is special, but even in a normal work environment, this is really something that's going to transform in the sense of efficiency, that's going to make industrial and manufacturing companies much more productive. And that's why we see a lot of things that's happening in manufacturing space. But that being said, it is something that's being sort of non-coming. I really think technological advancement, both in hardware, edge computing we talked about, and while in the past we have a lot of those equipment, but the equipment were able to capture data, not really necessarily processing the data as efficiently. at the place where data is being generated. And so that's really the key here, but also software, all that. And so we're very excited. We see opportunities in really getting some of this technology to real use case and to get them into scale.
Yeah, I think you're right. We've had a lot of smart devices, but what have they actually been intelligent around? And I think that tees up Gavin pretty well as to, the big overarching question. I mean, Gavin, you've been in IoT for over 20 years, over 10. I won't date you too much, and now live, breathe, and eat Edge on a daily, hourly basis, where we get to have conversations about it. I mean, what has been accelerated, further on from Irfan and Connie's point as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, both Irfan and Connie make great points there, and I mean, as Irfan was saying, manufacturing and supply chain are certainly markets where we're seeing a lot of adoption. Clearly, in COVID, we've seen a lot of disruption of supply chain, and so that is driving a demand for people to really know where the stuff in their supply chain is. So therefore, you need location tracking. Logistics is one of the biggest kind of industrial use cases of IoT, and the biggest early adopter use case. And we ran a survey at the end of last year, start of this year, where we got inputs from 1,000 adopters of IoT, and certainly we found that the supply chain use cases were some of the drivers and the biggest early adopter use cases, as also with smart buildings. The smart buildings is something where, in the area of compliance, we're going to see people want to understand that the people coming into their building are, not carrying a virus with them, so therefore temperature check monitoring and so on, that kind of health monitoring application. And in the edge specific environment, that kind of machine vision, edge AI, it's certainly an area we've seen a lot of growth in. Edge AI as a space, we've seen huge growth in the last 6-8 months in interest in that space. So edge is a full system end to end, from cloud to the far edge, if you like. But the piece around embedding, miniaturizing AI and embedding it into chips, or allowing it to run on a very small memory footprint, that's seen a lot of growth, and I think that's something we're going to see a lot of requirement around for those monitoring style situations in buildings.
Yeah, so with that being said, I have to ask the interesting question that has plagued me for many, many years in IoT. And, you talk about smart building. Let's talk a little bit about a smart city. Smart city has been named the biggest investment opportunity, the biggest opportunity to build in. Many companies have tried, and unfortunately, many have disappeared as the idea of a smart city has just kind of come and gone. A question to all three of you in kind of two parts is, one, will we ever see a truly smart city? And if so, where are the opportunities so that we don't continue to see those companies kind of fly off the map? And Gavin, I'll start with you, and then Irfan and Connie. So Gavin, smart cities, is this actually going to happen? And what does that look like?
So yes, it will happen. It is happening. I think a lot of the challenges around smart cities, when you think of an entirely smart city, it comes down to actually how much central decision making there is in the governance of cities in certain states. So I think where you see rapid progress of smart cities, there's very centralized decision making in some of the states that are driving fast. And when you look at sort of globally, it's a rough rule of thumb, I would say, some of the Asian states have very centralized decision making. So if you look at how Singapore's driven ahead, for instance, with smart cities, versus maybe moderately centralized in Europe and in the US, perhaps the least decentralized processes around decision making in smart cities, and that's perhaps from a US perspective why we see a little less progress. Nonetheless, there are some big wins that can be made in efficiencies in smart cities. So I think you need to look at things that give very clear benefits for either saving lives, that kind of first responder kind of situation, or things that drive cost savings in particular. So and so simple things like traffic management, we've seen huge growth in Edge AI being used to monitor traffic flows or intelligently switch traffic flows. So that's one example. Or on the cost saving side, you look towards more efficient refuse collection and things like that, where it's not trivial, but it's easier to sort of install monitoring of those kind of it's a clear case to install sensors which can tell you when the a manufacturing site's waste disposal needs to be emptied and so on. So a couple of things there. It's about government, but if you look for the easy wins, I think.
Yeah, those are definitely some keys. And Connie, I see you shaking your head. Anything further to add on that?
Yeah, so this current crisis we're in really made me think, our cities, why we think they're all digitized, they're all sort of kinds of information centered around making coordinated decisions, but we're not. So I definitely think there are needs, and when I see people wanting to get to hospital when they're sick, and so this is talking about when the instance first happened in Wuhan, China, a very large city, right? A city of 10 million people. But when the government decided to shut down the transportation for good reasons, because again, they're public transportations. These are places people are sort of together in very close proximity, and so you pass along the diseases. But the decision making process of shutdown transportation at the time does create some really bad, maybe unintended consequences. So as I'm thinking about smart cities, how do we have all the information and a decision making process, a very informed, not signal-based decision-making process, so that not only creates the desired result, but also minimize the unintended consequences in some cases. And I think it's, I'm hopeful, but I feel like it's long way to come. I would love to hear your thoughts, and Gavin's thoughts is very, very, very encouraging. And we are also investors in, obviously, autonomous driving, in smart building, in smart parking space, right? But they're all sort of siloed, sort of a segment by itself. So how do we bring all of those information together?
See, you're jumping ahead of my question. That was going to be it. So, I'll give you my quick view, and then Irfan as well. I believe there is a chance, and I think siloing is how it will have to start in some cases, right? Silo, focus, prove out the use case, and then bring it back to the bigger picture, because there is some openness that has to be done at the government level, right? When building in a city, and no matter how much money any of us throw at that as investors or as analysts from the data side, it's not going to change. There has to be some openness, at the government level. And this goes into a bigger play around the development of ecosystems and how we do develop, whether it's technology, it's startup, or it's venture ecosystems. The government plays the foundational role, and it has to open up some of those things. But I will hold on that because I don't want to steal the question away from you, because I do believe there is a way to bring all this together, because I do believe in this kind of idealistic world we're moving towards, where everything is more digitized, right? We've all talked about this offline, and Irfan, I've talked to Kate about this as well, and it's just your partner, and it's coming. And we're seeing pieces of it now, and I think in some cases we're not ready for the whole thing. You know, I gave a very exciting, not to plug myself here, but I gave a TED talk not long ago, and the thesis of my talk was really this: is the idea that technology would come together and be so integrated into our lives that it just worked. Right? And now we're still having to call these things out as different technologies, as, you know, different apps and different pieces, when really it should just be, I need to go get groceries, or, oh, the food has arrived today, right? Or, oh, my car has just picked me up and taken me to see Gavin, or, oh, you know, we're doing this. It's just, everything should just work. But I won't go too deep, because I'll go too deep too long. So let's pause there. Irfan, I want to come back to you, because I know you have views on this, but at the same time, you and I both play in this world of blockchain, and I would love to hear your thoughts even further on how blockchain plays a role in this as well.
Right. Thanks, Kyle. And everything that Gavin and Connie shared, they were all in line as to what I think. But at the same time, I just wanted to add that I don't think that smart cities are something that's going to happen. It's the question about when it's going to happen. And so when I say smart, I'm saying like, how we are going to efficiently manage all the services that we require in our day-to-day life. So I think sometimes, this term has been misused. Of course, there are challenges. So, usually when something like this comes up, I always tell that, we're trying to drive Formula One in a horse riding train. That's not going to work. Like we have to think about the entire infrastructure, right? So people come to me and tell me that, do you really think that autonomous cars are a reality? Is that going to happen? Well, it's going to happen, right? But we need to have like the infrastructure in place to see, how that's going to come about. We already have, like you say, it's siloed, it's and different developments are happening in different places. But how are everything's going to come into place? And that's why the infrastructure plays a big part, whether it is the system infrastructure, whether it is the policy infrastructure, all that put together. Earlier in my conversation, I already mentioned that Edge is one of the processes to maintain IoT. And Kyle, you rightly put out that there are other processes, right? So obviously there are challenges that we are looking at into the evolution of this technology itself, right? So obviously we have to a lot of extent we have managed to tackle the cost of the challenges of cost, maybe maintenance, but we still have other issues, right? Power limitation. Just now, Gavin mentioned energy efficiency. That's an important aspect. Computation limitation, data privacy, security. These are also things that are going to come into play, as Connie was mentioning. That a lot of unintended things have happened when government has taken certain evasive action to shut down an entire city, without having data. But then again, the question is, if they want to make a informed decision, how much excess of data do they need to have? So these kind of laws and guidelines are also important, right? So, and how do that go about? And the infrastructure itself, as I mentioned, right now, as they're siloed, it's complicated. We have had systems, we don't have systems that are speaking the same language a lot of the time, and which is a major problem. Blockchain, on the other end, is a very interesting solution, right? It's a decentralized, distributed computing. It is built and it is designed to deal situations like this. And what blockchain is very good at, and we all know that. So one is identification of devices. So whether it's device integrity, how do we manage that? Whether it is in terms of security and privacy. These are important aspects that blockchain is able to do. Also, the other aspect is that as we are talking about multiple amount of machines, right? We're talking about like data that's increasing at almost vertical axis, right? So pretty much, there's no more a curve anymore. It's pretty much vertical. We are generating zettabytes of data so quickly than ever before. So is the traditional system or are the traditional systems designed to handle this? Because as we know that that is another issue, right? So blockchain, on the other hand, is helpful in those areas, right? So where we do not need large amount of throughput of data in one particular place. I mean, we can have distributed data across in different places where certain operations and functions needed to be done. I'm not going to take a deep dive into that. As I said, this is a topic that's very near and dear to me. But I'll pause right there. But like I said, it's the question about when, and and also we need it because obviously the pandemic have shown that we can continue like this. So we need to get our game up in terms of digitizing our services and solutions. So yeah, I'll pause right there. Thank you.
Absolutely. Gavin, I saw you pause. Or Connie, go ahead. I saw both of you react. So Connie, go for it.
I wanted to add a little bit of our recent observation, as Mohammed said, in security and privacy preserving areas. We really see, even though we're not so much of a blockchain sort of investment firm, however, we see the fundamental technology being applied in areas such as in data sharing. So data sharing obviously has a lot of use cases, but one of the use cases we find is particularly interesting in this day and age is in healthcare, is in drug discovery. And so those are data particularly subject to privacy preserving rules. And some of the policies that we see is popping up everywhere globally. And so as a fundamental base technology, and building on top of this are some of this other federated learning, differential privacy. But we see fairly consistently that this blockchain is being leveraged by some of this newer distributed learning and data sharing company as a fundamental layer. And so maybe, I don't know if you guys, both of you, Kyle and Mohammed, has any comment on that. I think it's very exciting.
I do, and I will say it very quickly because I see Gavin unmuted himself as well. So blockchain, I think, will very much play a role in this, right? Whether it's blockchain as an infrastructure holistically, or if it's going to be around things like pieces of decentralized technology. So whether it's smart contracts where we have those rules and regulations in place, right? If then this, or if it's a type of identity protection, as Irfan had brought up as well, right? So certain data is restricted and held, and one of the areas I'm studying and very excited about as well is the idea of decentralized identity, so DID, and being able to hold in your information and release it where appropriately, and kind of that self-custody of that information. But going further at the enterprise, you are going to need those rules and regulations, right? Governance is going to play a different role than it has in the past. The data privacy is a big open-ended question at how we're going to protect that above and beyond putting information on, say, a private blockchain, and then even more so smart contracts. And again, I'm calling out just a few key areas, not going full in depth as we could, but something like smart contracts, understanding the flow of data, where the data has come from, and then where the data is going. There's still a lot of work to be done. And I know there's a few companies that have tried, but rolling all that up, you still have very traditional pieces in place like HIPAA when it comes to compliance and policies. And some of those areas like government and smart cities need to also be flexible and adjusting as well. So I'll pause there. But Gavin, I want to come back to you. I saw you unmute with Connie. Anything additional to add outside of my blockchain rant there for a moment?
Yeah, well, blockchain will clearly play a very important role, and as Irfan said, this whole challenge around the data in smart cities, particularly in environments where there are multiple entities governing that city, that's really, really important. So, are we going to see the emergence of data brokerage entities that are sort of pulling together that data and allowing for that data to be analyzed in some way? Clearly, keeping that data anonymized in certain ways is going to be very, very important. Blockchain, as you've spoken to, can play a very important role there. But it's also one of the things that's driving edge computing. Actually, is the move towards enhanced data security. People often talk about latency and low input or high input output, the cost of moving the data around as being key drivers of edge, and they are key drivers. But actually, we see regulation and data residency as being a key aspect of the drivers towards edge computing and security of data as well. And clearly in places like Europe, I know we have a lot of viewers in Europe, GPDR is helping to drive that, but it can also be for other reasons, such as corporate reasons, that entities don't want to release their data. They're concerned about releasing their data. So we're in an environment where there's this huge tsunami of data creation, right? And that's IoT drove that, the ability to do all this analysis. Now we're getting a huge amount of data. How do we actually utilize that, the enormous assets that are being created there? And that's the key challenge for the next decade, I think, really. And edge computing is part of that picture. Blockchain is probably part of that picture. But how do we mine or drill this oil effectively? And oil data being the new oil, right? So how do we actually get it out of the ground and effectively get it into an engine? That's the key challenge for all of us.
Yeah, and also add some integrity or value out of it, right? So for 10 plus years, we've had the Internet of Things where there's been devices everywhere, but as we've all, I think, agreed, there's a lot of smart, dumb devices that have collected stuff, but unuseful or useless in the other sense. And there's been nothing done with them because either they're too far out, so they have no relay. And this is where edge comes into play, or there's just been no trust factor that the data is, one, relevant, two, is true, or three, there's no source to where it comes from. From your research and things that you've been looking at in general, how are you seeing this change? Where are the drills? Where are the refineries? Where are these kind of picks and shovels, if you will, to further the analogy, to actually getting value out of this data? Because if not, what's the point? Who cares?
Yeah.
Right? There is no smart city. There is no smart retail. It doesn't matter. It's just all dumb until we're actually able to do something. So where are you seeing the picks and shovels at for this?
Well, there's lots of new techniques arising for the analytics of data at the edge, right? So we've talked a little bit about Edge AI. So analyzing the data where it's created rather than shipping it around for various reasons, cost, efficiencies, privacy, etc. Streaming analytics of data at the edge. So actually, as the data is being streamed, variety of newer emergent data platforms in the space. So, we're seeing entities as broad as Microsoft Azure and AWS bringing edge platforms to the market, as well as a host of new startups. And there's huge opportunities for investors actually in this space to talk to. That's one of the core themes of this panel. We're seeing software platforms emerge across the space, and a key area of activity, I think, is in actually application management. So how do you manage applications across the cloud and to the edge, and When you have a very decentralized application architecture, how are we going to manage those applications, update them, make sure that everything is being effectively orchestrated? That's a huge area.
Irfan, I saw you saw Irfan taking notes over there and shaking his head left and right, so up and down. I mean, obviously you have more to add on this. I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thanks so much. I just couldn't, agree more with what Gavin and Connie and you, Kyle, you have to share. And then again, like I said, of course, it's, I mean, the question is, again, is how we manage this data, where's the evolution of the technology itself? And like you said, it has been there, for starters, obviously it's been there even earlier than the term that we are using today. We have just been improving. As you may know, in some parts of the world, still, we are having process of transformation from analog to digital that's going on. So I mean, when you look at it, yes, parts of the world have made that shift, but still a lot of the world are still trying to make that shift or trying to understand, still are maintaining brick and mortar methods of doing things. I mean, until this pandemic, we still and a lot of the businesses still preferred in-person meeting, and now that the entire situation has changed, everything is fine, we are okay with the Zoom meeting and we can now get this thing done. But before, we can even have like and a lot of level, and of course, it differs from places to places, but majority still of the deals and the closing of the deals still had to happen in person. And that's to show that we as humanity are going through that evolution also. It's a perception shift, so it's not going to happen overnight, right? So now it's the utilization and the perception of how we understand this machine and the technologies that we are having these days, and the way we are able to interpret the data, and also the improvement in other areas. So for example, in the fields of nanotechnology, improvements in the fields of data science, have allowed us to understand data better, to utilize the sensors better, right? And as you may know, some of the large incumbents have already targeted this industry even more, some of the bigger players, right? So I think, obviously there are plenty of use case areas, and as we mentioned, but one thing that I would always say, and that we as investors that we constantly look at it, is a term that I always use, it's called the reward economy, right? So the reward economy, in that reward economy, IoT is going to play a very important part, right? So we have already seen that IoT managed car driving, right? So that you can get a better insurance rate, whether it's to do with your personal gears, so to get a better healthcare rate. So this is going to peak, and the sensors are going to play even bigger part. And the sensors, the more and more improved they get, the more and more computation power that we are able to provide to that, we're going to be able to interpret those data and utilize those data for multiple or multiverse of reasons. So I'll pause right there, but I think that's a sector that I think will be very interesting in the coming years.
Yeah, again, I saw Gavin still shaking his head. I saw everyone agreeing with you. And yesterday on VCTV, we spoke about the rise of the virtual economy, right, around gaming and entertainment, and how this new digitized, or again, virtual economy has started to rise, where you've got individuals who are farming or renting virtual real estate, making $25,000 up to well beyond $200,000 US a year currently on something that's in its earliest stage, as early adopters. Think about how that changes in mass adoption, right? Going back to 2008, we had the early days of what we now refer to as the gig economy that has created tons of jobs, new companies, and powered a whole new source of income. And you're bringing it to the next level of, as we kind of solve this gap of adoption today, what comes on the other side of this is, I believe, and would love to hear everyone else's opinion, this new economy. Furthermore, Irfan, where our cars do generate revenue for us, right? While we sleep is the dream. We're able to do more, whether it's having a hotspot, and there's tons of companies out there, whether it's a node or it's a hotspot, that we're able to generate small dollars. We're able to give energy back to the grid, get some more dollars. I believe we refer to this in the blockchain space or in finance as stacking. There's plenty of opportunity. So Gavin, Connie, would love to hear your thoughts on this rise of a new economy, or if that's not true, and this is all just false advertising to something that we all want and hope for, but may never happen.
No, I think again, I agree with everyone. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. But we definitely see some of this happening already, such as in the area of autonomous driving car. We have invested in a company that has now the largest fleet of cars, AV cars, that's running in the city of Guangzhou, China. And so you could also imagine, when you have a service like that, you could imagine that you have your grocery already packed in the car when the car picked you up. You could also imagine you bring a bag of dry, sort of clothing for dry clean. And so once you leave the car, your car will take your bag of clothing to the dry clean shop, right? So there are just a lot of services. It can be mobilized around this concept of service coming to you instead of you go to the service places. So I think it's very exciting. And for that, as an investor, we have to think where we place the bets, such as in the edge computing. We really think this computing power is critical. This, sort of new generation of ASIC that takes consideration of amount of data and be able to process that very, very efficiently. And you could go to smaller application of just waking up certain machines with very simple command that doesn't really sort of causing so much power on some of those real edge devices, to an edge server where sufficient amount of computing power is there to take ton of those data stream from local areas around the edge server. So we're investing in those use cases that we see a lot of potentials there.
Gavin.
I mean, absolutely, absolutely, and even at the most mundane of levels, this era of COVID, we're seeing, highly distributed workforces. So as we are collaborating here on a collaboration tool, there were many early pioneers of diverse workforces and extensive use of collaboration tools, but clearly that's become a very much more mainstream activity now. And we're going to see that much more broadly embraced as we come out of this period of COVID. You're already hearing, I'm based here in Silicon Valley, and you hear a lot about the impact that this might have on property prices and so on in the area as the economy changes around distributed workforces. So clearly we're going to see workforces be much more diverse and distributed, and that's going to place much further demands on communications infrastructure, including edge computing, because we're going to need much more distributed processing power, just for simple things like that, let alone getting on to, and I do agree with Connie's I'm a believer in this the pod concept of the autonomous car, where the hairdresser will come to me, and if I was commuting still, I would get my hair cut on the way to work. But maybe I won't be going to that workplace anyway, so maybe it's going to be on the way to the theatre or something, or the football game. But there's from the most, if it's the autonomous car cases, in a future vision but even at a very mundane level, we're going to see these drivers towards the edge.
So all this being said, there's one thing that's only been teased out for half a second during this conversation. It's probably the biggest topic in all of this if we unpacked it, and that's the future of connectivity and the idea of 5G. And I say idea because it's been talked about, it's been controversial, it's been loved, it's been hated, it's been rolled out but not rolled out, but it's global but it's not. We now have things like private wireless that's starting to come up. We have other methods of connectivity. We have Starlink that just went live, or starting to go live thanks to SpaceX. I mean, what does the future of connectivity look like? Is 5G really going to change our lives, or is it all BS? Is 5G already out of date and we're seeing 6G? What is the future of connectivity really look like, and how will that affect us? Irfan, I'd like to start with you if possible.
Right, thanks, Kyle. So you've definitely, touched on a very important topic. So I'll take a more technical approach to this one. So I'll say, the holy grail for us is singularity. So, whether it is, whether it is the improvement of, the existing technology or the convergence of all the technologies that we are using, because at the end of the day, this is all for purpose for us to have a more efficient life. So, and I think one major roadblock to that, and this one topic that I'm going to touch more than any other places, is energy, right? So energy efficiency is no more fashionable. It's a requirement. Before it was more like a cosmetic thing that we want to have a smart building, we want to have smart, energy featured house, et cetera, et cetera. Now, as you can see, one thing that the pandemic have shown is that, we expected, us to be hit by a global situation. We just didn't think that it's going to hit us this fast. We have been expecting, us to have an energy crisis for the last 40 to 50 years, right? Our preparations have been very nominal, and believe me, it can come to us, anytime, and we are not prepared for that. So in other words, we are trying to improve in factors and areas, and of course, when it comes to this singularity, that is one of the major roadblocks that is there, because it halts us to reach a certain computation power. We already know we have quantum computers that are there. It requires tremendous amount of power to deliver the next level of things, right? And for us to get to those points, we need to be able to resolve that. And the reason I mentioned this is because, as I say, besides being an institutional investor, prior to this, I've been an individual investor and also an entrepreneur, right? So, and I like to take hands-on approach to some of the core problems. So in this case, I feel like energy is an area where I want to roll my sleeves up and, with the companies and get down and start working on that, because that is going to be the roadblock or the feature that's going to be playing a big part into what you say. If 5G or singularity or whatever you want to call it, 6G, or the evolution of our or the digital evolution to come to reality. So I'll just pause right there. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Gavin, we had a conversation about this last night, talking about 5G and all of these pieces. And to me, it's exciting, but to our audience, is this real or is this BS? I mean, where are we in this future of connectivity?
I mean, 5G is definitely coming. I mean, there's a lot of investment that's gone into 5G. 5G in the US is probably going to be a little bit delayed just because of the supply chain disruption we touched on earlier in this conversation. But 5G is already being deployed in parts of Asia. You know, it's in China and Japan. There are already 5G services that are starting to roll out. So it's definitely on the way. I think you know, it's an interesting service and capability, and in the context of IoT. I think one of the things that's not highlighted, that's interesting to talk about, or highlighted so much, is actually the density of connections that the 5G allows. So that's really going to help drive the capability in IoT, because we'll be able to connect wirelessly so many more things, and therefore probably at a much lower cost with a 5G connection. Also, it enables much lower latency, as we know, and high bandwidth. It also is a big step forward in edge computing, because edge is necessitated to deliver 5G. So really, 5G needs edge computing to roll out. It's probably that 5G is you know, edge computing enables 5G rather than the other way around. But it's going to make a massive difference in terms of our connectivity capability.
Connie, same to you. I mean, you talked about some of the investments you've made in the transportation space. We've talked a lot about manufacturing. In my eyes, I've heard use cases that this could change the world of manufacturing and supply chain. I've seen companies looking at this at the logistics side. We've seen this at transportation, but again, you know, not discrediting what Gavin and Irfan said, but to your thoughts, is 5G real, or what does the future connectivity look like from your standpoint as well?
Thanks, Kyle. Maybe I'll take a step back, think about some of those places where 5G has been deployed, such as in Korea by pretty large percent coverage. In China, I would say some people guessed that we probably have in some of the major cities close to a quarter to a third of coverage of 5G. But what I don't see is at this right now, that much of use cases for the 5G as what I have been talking to people, hearing what people are saying. So use cases become very critical for 5G populating in cities. One of the critical things we think, again, we talked about, you know, transportation, autonomous driving. I really think that's very connected. The two, maybe they hopefully will be sort of the technology versus use case coming together beautifully. You know, for AV to populate, you need the kind of connectivity that 5G provides. But on the other hand, people I certainly hearing in China is that they're hoping that the autonomous driving car really provide a convincing argument for further deployment of 5G as well. So manufacturing and medical services, I think those are all areas of critical services. But that being said, in the near case, I see entertainment, gaming being another driver for 5G. So, but with the bigger question I have in my mind is that with what's going on between US and China, and between the world, how the world looks at wind supply versus others, how does that affect 5G deployment? How does that affect 5G technology in terms of whether or not we're going to have a consistent standard across the world? that's something that I'm certainly thinking, and I don't think there's an answer to that yet. Maybe, hopefully, the world has wisdom to solve those kind of issues.
Gavin.
Yeah, I mean that's a big challenge to Connie's point, and I mean you mentioned 6G in your tee up to this question, and I was going to say, Carl, calm down, it's 10 years away. But actually, one of our colleagues, Phil, our chief research officer, he has a view that actually geopolitical issues might accelerate 6G because the way 5G has been designed, that there's been an integral involvement of Eastern and Western manufacturers, right? So, and is that actually going to affect the ability of 5G to be pervasive? One of the analyst companies, I'm trying to remember which one, I think it was Omdia, came out yesterday with some stats saying that in the UK, not using Chinese manufacturers, which is being mooted at the moment, that might cost the UK 5G operators an extra 1.5 billion pounds. So it's really going to considerably affect the speed of rollout and the cost effectiveness of rollout, and then also the hunger for use cases from the carriers, as Connie was saying. So it could have a major impact, right?
Yeah, and also seeing telecom outages earlier this week across the country, right? Some of the major telecoms went dark. No real reason as to why, or we were told different rumors and different things. This it's interesting. I was trying to think of a good movie reference, where we just skipped over, the middle movie, but I think you're right. We could see that leap. And Connie, I don't want to take away, so I'll let you continue.
Oh no, and this is great. I noticed that as well, but I'm still very hopeful, right? So I think there's still fundamentally a lot of things being developed here in this country and around the world around how we deploy 5G efficiently, and the recognition of having 5G, having a fast connectivity, and the demand and the use cases are emerging, are there. I think eventually we're going to find a way to deal with that. But in the meantime, as an investor, we have to think about how do we managing the type of investment to not only think about the importance of the technology itself, but also think about the timing of getting things deployed and scaled in large quantity. And that's always a factor that affects really how companies be able to grow and thrive, or not be able to, take advantage of the technology itself, versus hindered by what's going on really outside the capability of the company themselves. And so we just have to keep those in mind as an investor. How do we work with our companies?
Yeah, so that brings up a great point. I see everyone shaking their heads, and I'll just say, in the Internet of Things, we've seen some, we've heard the tale, hardware is hard, as this was kind of a reemergence of people getting into hardware, or getting into consumer devices, or even, sensors for that matter. We've seen a lot of losses, a lot of very painful losses on the investment side. And I think you're bringing up a very good topic that we'd like to cover here on VCTV, of all these different technologies is, what do things look like from an investor standpoint? Putting millions of dollars, or even hundreds of thousands of dollars, or tens of millions of dollars, right, at work as an investor is risky when the timeline continues to get longer and there's things that are leapfrogging one another. So, Connie, to kind of start off with you, is as an investor, how are you looking at this space? How are you choosing to make decisions on potential investments, knowing that there's potentially a long journey ahead?
Yeah, so first of all, we as investors, we tend to be earlier stage investor, but we're very much core technology focused. As we think of IoT, we really have to think hard. Where are some of those core tech relies? And in addition, we now looking at use case and customer engagement very carefully. You can very easily have a POC, but we all know a POC doesn't necessarily get you to a purchase order, and especially a long-term supply customer relationship. And so those are the things as we look at new companies, we have to think about, but we also take a consideration of the macro trend. Why we don't really sort of, especially as an early stage investor, we don't really make our investment decision based on some of those headline news, right? But we do have clear recognition that some of those could put your company off by 6 months or a year, and that runway is critical, right? The money you spent not being producing is potentially a factor of life or death for startup companies. And so it is very difficult, but we really think great companies rises from crisis. So we think this is a great time being an early stage investor. We continue to invest. In March, we actually made a bet in a mixed signal AI chip company. It's got an amazing team and great technological foundation. And there's obviously, as you guys all know very well, that it's going to take a lot of money and time to further develop the technology and product. But we really see a lot of use cases. We talked about IoT, edge computing, and this is the type of technology that's very much needed for edge computing. And so we're very hopeful.
Yeah, and as an investor as well, like mindset is something, all right? So as you make an investment in these spaces, for those in our audience today, mindset, these are long-term bets, as Connie's mentioning, and I know Irfan and Gavin will add to. You're not investing for the next year, and you should never be as an investor, but nonetheless, you're looking not just 3 to 5, you're looking 5 to 10, 10 to 15, plus years out. And whether you're at early stage like Connie or kind of mid stage like Irfan and Gavin and myself, you want to play that longer game, and that's a mindset change. And from the startup side, one of the things I've been looking at, Connie, I'm furthering your point, is supply chains. So where are your supply chains before? Where are they now? And how are you thinking? How can you react to supply chain challenges? Because if things do change, to Gavin's and your points around 5G, right, on a macro level, it's not about headlines, it's also about how you adapt, right? So looking at how the companies are adapting or thinking about specifically around their supply chains, because, copy paste a sensor, creating devices, these things, you want to make sure you have redundancy built in, because if one gets cut off, that could be life or death for your company, which we saw, unfortunately, with some consumer devices. But with that being said, Irfan, I want to get your opinion as well as an investor. Aside from what Connie and I've added, we'd love to hear your thoughts. How are you looking at investments today in these spaces as our audience, both entrepreneurs and investors, are kind of readying themselves to dive in?
Right. Thanks, Kyle. And so for starters, of course, for us, apart from the business sense of investment, we're fully invested in the space also. We want this space, this ecosystem. We play a part in this ecosystem. We want that to accelerate, right? Because of the necessity, because of the solutions and the services that it'll be able to provide. I think Connie touched a very important point. And one of those, every generation of technology had certain application areas which were prime which were more primed to be successful in the early stages compared to others. So the development of, as Gavin can tell, since he's been in that field for a very long time, the development of cellular technology has allowed communication to go to the heights that what it is right now today, and the developments have happened in that area. As Connie mentioned, with the newer technologies and the newer systems that are coming, autonomous or transportation would be a very important sector, and we have already seen that. The big fives have, and I'm sure during this time you might have seen some headline news that one of the big fives have made significant bet on an autonomous car company based here in Silicon Valley, right? So, and it is an area that we know that it is going to play a very big part. And so apart from that, and I think the important aspects of what I tend to look at is that it's not about being first in the game that allows you to kind of like come up with better solution. As Connie mentioned, it's proof of concept is not just enough. We as an investor, I tend to look at more tenacity, right? So the companies that kind of like came out of that and are able to also go through a situation like this, a crisis, which allows them to to pivot or change or add additional elements that shows the business tenacity for those businesses. So at the end of the day, of course, there's going to be, and Kyle, I'm sure you're familiar with it because you've been in the blockchain space, and there's been a lot of companies that came up with very similar solution, but a lot of them have fizzled out. And that is what it's, that's the trend in almost all industries, right? So, and there's nothing different with this industry too. It's all about, how, you are able to solve a critical problem and how you're able to, the market itself is the biggest driver. So I will not take the other, take that, that, of course, government plays a big part, but I think market itself, the market demand plays the bigger part in terms of the evolution of both the ecosystem in terms of the technology, the startups, but also in terms of where investors would like to kind of like swarm in or the areas. Yeah. Thanks.
Gavin, I saw you on mute. Anything further to add? I mean, you're looking at this space constantly and seeing right and wrong companies. I mean, what else would you look at as an investor in this space?
Yeah, I mean, in the context of the whole COVID situation and IoT and Edge, I mean, you've just got to look at the fundamentals that we've touched on throughout this session. So the huge growth in data that we're seeing and the general requirement that's going to place on the underlying system that you just have to process data closer to the source, and that's really going to drive the distributed architecture. So in terms of how that impacts what individual companies you look at, well, clearly that's going to drive the space, but you need to look at companies that have protectable IP and a place to have a robust run rate. Software companies are probably stronger plays, I would say, given that, than hardware plays. So some of the hardware or infrastructure architecture plays are more costly to roll out. So they're there for they're big bets. So they're for people with strong appetites. But in the software space, we've touched on streaming analytics and Edge AI are very hot areas. And there are companies coming to market with still quite lean teams in those areas that have a lot of potential. And this whole area of application management, I mean, over the last few years, we've seen huge boom in Kubernetes orchestration, container-based application management. And for some edge environments, containers will be an appropriate way of to manage, but when you're talking about the very far edge, the device edge, then containers take up too much resource to effectively manage the far edge. So there's plenty of opportunities around containerless orchestration, whether that's serverless or other approaches. And there's some pretty interesting approaches coming to market right now. So those I'd say were robust, strong areas to look at in the sort of next generation architecture.
Yeah, and just to add on further to that, I think one of the trends that I've been seeing myself as well is kind of this, what goes back to the principles of portfolio construction and portfolio management, right? You're Connie, early stage investor, you're hoping not to just get in and disappear, but continue to make bets throughout. And I think what we're seeing in a growing trend around Edge and also blockchain along with IoT is these early stage bets, but managing your dry powder to continue to follow on as these companies are long bets, right? On the blockchain side, we saw a surge of investments from 2017 to 2019, 2017 to 2019. Those are early plays into the next decade, right? And same with Edge and some of the areas that we've mentioned, like transportation, mobility. You know, as investors, you want to think about not just going big on your first check, but entering in, being there as a additional resource, providing, not just additional capital along the way, but more strategic value, so that when the next round comes, and the next round, and the next round, as Connie mentioned, they will, because these take a lot of capital to do, that you're well positioned to continue to follow on and manage those companies. You know, you look at someone like SpaceX, who's been around for quite some time, continues to grow, and other companies as well in these spaces that are continuing to build and mature and raise additional capital, and it's not small. So as investors, think about how you manage not just that first investment, but the dry powder to continue on in these longer bets as they do play at a new level, and not necessarily new in terms of anything we haven't heard of before, but in a new area of investment, and that is infrastructure. Infrastructure is not a quick bet. It is not a SaaS type of typical bet we've seen in the past. These are long-term plays, and for the better. They're platforms, they're things that can be built on top of. So key last point. Now, lightning round question as we come to wrap here on today's show. What are the areas of opportunity that you're excited about, or that investors should be paying attention to out there? And Connie, I want to start with you. What are you seeing that's super exciting in Edge and IoT as an investor that you're looking at, or that could be a rising category for other investors?
Again, I run some of this newly started a trend of their privacy-related security and edge analytics for medical, for drug development, for financials. And those are areas that we're looking at very closely, and we're getting close to make certain bets. It's very exciting. Data. What are we going to do with data, audience? This is a common theme we've talked about on every single show this week, and last week, and the week before, and the week before that. What are we going to do with the data from all of this work that we all do as entrepreneurs and investors? Connie just reiterated it. We've talked about it for the past hour and a half. Make sure you look at this area very, very closely. Irfan, same to you. What are you excited about? What are you looking at?
Thanks, Kyle. And I think, definitely for me, the top three would be, and particularly in this topic, would be in the autonomous sector of autonomous transportation. Two would be energy, and the third would be more on the hardware development side.
Hardware development. Unpack that for a second. What does that mean?
So, I mean, essentially, I think Connie touched a little bit on that, is that, newer improvements in ASICs and computation power is going to change, how we deal with data itself, right? And we already know that there are developments and improvements that are happening in the field of nanotechnology, as well as, computation, right? So whether quantum computing is coming, and, how, it's already here, and, how we are going to be able to use that in a more widespread level would be the key factor, right? So, and I think, at the end of the day, so for me, I see a whole lot of new opportunities as well as transformation that these three sectors that will enable. So transportation, energy, and developments in the hardware area.
Love it. Gavin, same to you.
Yeah, just recapping on the ones we've discussed throughout this session. So distributed application management, or I mean that comes in various flavors: distributed cloud, edge management. But it's just pretty much the same area. Edge AI, the software and hardware that's playing in that space, and the streaming analytics piece for Edge AI is very strong as well, I think. So those would be my 3 picks.
Awesome. I love it. So to our audience, again, you hear it here every day. You're hearing it yet again. Data privacy. And what are we going to do with this data? One of the things we talked about on yesterday's episode of VCT was that while we collect all this data, that's great, it also can act as a perishable. Data can actually expire or no longer be tangible because you haven't done anything with it. So as you've heard from this panel and from other editions, figure out what can we do with this data? How can we leverage it? How can we monitor it? And then how can we manage it as well? Everyone, thank you so very much. As we do on every episode, a quick closing thoughts and where everyone can find you online. So either you yourself and or your company. Irfan, let's start with you. Closing thoughts and where can everyone find you online?
Right. Thanks, Kyle, and Connie and Gavin for this entertaining session, and of course, LA Token for organizing this very important topic. That being said, and as I said always, is that technology improvements are here to make our lives better. And at the end of the day, it is imperative for us to push the boundaries of it and to make improvements of it. So that's kind of my thought. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, you can reach out to me at info@sheikhmohammedirfan.com. And I have always had interest in both in the architecture system as well as the hardware system of this particular field that we have discussed. Thank you, Kyle.
Wonderful. Connie, same to you. Closing thoughts and where can everyone find you?
Thanks, Kyle, for the invitation. I didn't know it's such a interesting, exciting session. And thanks to Mohammed and Gavin, and hope to stay in touch with all of you guys. And I just think we're fortunate in this day and age and be able to do what we do. And every day when I'm looking at new technologies, I'm very excited. And I think we're in the day and age where a lot of ideas and technology are sort of being spring up every day. So it's very exciting, and just never give up technology, never give up the economy. I think while we're in a difficult time, but there's hope coming on the horizon. So if you wanted to get in touch with me, Connie at nautilusvp.com.
Wonderful, thank you. And Gavin, to you, closing thoughts and where can everyone find you?
Thanks, Carl, and thanks, Connie and Irfan, It's been a really exciting session. Really loved all the ideas being floated here. I mean, working in technology, as both my co-panelists have said, is just really inspiring every day and really exciting because you can see solutions coming to market. For those who are looking at the market, actually, it's useful in these times and any time that you can get free information, free market analysis on the Topio Networks platform, topionetworks.com. You can reach me at gavin.whitechurch@topionetworks.com. Be happy to chat to anybody. Welcome questions. So thanks, Carl. Thanks, Carl, for organizing the session, and also to LA Token. Thank you.
Wonderful. And to your audience, thank you so very much for tuning in. If you like today's episode and the content that we provided and want to see more, click that subscribe button or give us a thumbs up as well. As our panelists said, and thank you to all of you as investors and speakers today, they are all available on social media, email, web addresses. You can find all of them at the respective places, and definitely reach out and connect. All of us would love to hear from you and love to continue to see the new opportunities and technologies being built in this space. A shout out again to Elena and to the entire LA Token team for making this all possible. I'm Kyle Ellicott, your host for another edition of VC TV. We'll be back here tomorrow and on Friday with some new and additional topics to talk about. Everyone have a great day. Thank you again, panelists. Thank you.